forgiveness is a release of the emotional identity that you've put into the story, but it doesn't mean you forget. What that means is that you stop responding to the world in a way that you have been based off of the story that you've held on to. Instead, you can go amongst the world, and then if said thing happens to you again, a person who promised to respect you chooses not to, if a person comes after you, if, like, God forbid something bad happens similar to what happened before. If you go along the world thinking that that's going to happen regularly, you fear it all the time. When it shows back up, the easiest way to talk about this is like the lack of respect, right? If somebody disrespected you and then swore they would never do it again and then did it again, you forgave them the first time, but you didn't forget. Hi, welcome to Say More Words, a podcast that was created to emphasize the human experience through stories. I hope that you come here to learn, to expand, and most importantly, learn how to say more words. Speak your story, speak your truth, boo-boo. We're so happy you're here. Hey, everybody. How are you? It's good to see you again. My song of the day for today is Do It With a Broken Heart by Taylor Swift. Not that I have a broken heart. I mean, it is kind of broken in some ways, and so we'll talk about that in this episode. But it is Frankie Taylor's favorite song right now. And so we listen to it every morning on the way to school. And she blares it at the top of her, sings it at the top of her lungs. Frankie is in her, what I like to call her breakup era, and I don't know why. I am unsure why she's in her breakup era, but she's... So in one day she requested to listen to Single Ladies, Do It With a Broken Heart, Hello by Adele, Flowers by Miley Cyrus, Jolene. I mean, somebody broke her heart. We're not exactly sure who. And I don't think she even knows, but my music is dictated by my kids sometimes, and I'm here for Frankie's era. So Do It With a Broken Heart, Taylor Swift. Okay. So I say, doing it with a broken heart. If you've been around long enough, you know that the last couple months of my life have been kind of insane. So I'm recording this. It's September of 2024. I will let you know that I have, if you're only listening to this and not watching, I have on a burnt orange turtleneck. I have my fall mug that says hot cocoa, scary movies, pumpkin spice, flannel, murder, fall shit on it, because it is the third or fourth day of fall and we woke up to a lovely 62-degree morning. It is going to be a high of 83, but whatever. I don't care. If it gets hotter out, I'll just turn my AC down and I will continue to live in these fall vibes. So it is September of 2024. And the last few months, y'all, have just been one of those some of those character building months where I'm like, Jesus, I don't know exactly what you're preparing me for or who you're preparing me for. Actually, I do now know because they're all starting to show up right now. But the last few months, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And I think a lot of people are in this you've got to be kidding me stage of life because the inflation is crazy and people are crazy and the election right now is crazy. Everything's crazy. And so people are just really, what is happening? What is happening here? Like, you've just got to be kidding me. And so, but the last few months have been one of those things. And it's been one of those times that I didn't think I would ever get to experience. And the only reason why I'm experiencing the things I get to experience today, and I say get to, because even though they're hard, they're trials and tribulations, and I'm going through it, I get to experience it because of a decision I made a few years ago. So without further ado, here is the story on forgiveness. If you've not listened to episode 11, I highly suggest you go listen to episode 11 of the podcast because that explains my trauma story. And I don't think I'll ever stop talking about episode 11. It's truly the only episode I actually know the number for, the topic for, everything, because it's one of my most shared. It tells my story for people who have never heard it before. And it's important for you to understand that me telling my story was terrifying for me because it was all based around my trauma. And part of the reason why we left the Midwest in the first place is to get away from people knowing about that version of my life. I had to heal through that version of my life. So when I moved to Texas, nobody really knew that part of my story. And it was a couple years ago that somebody said to me that I needed to start telling that part of my story. And even when I did, I got attacked. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, I got attacked by some people who had heard different versions of the story from different people in the story. And that's fine. Their versions are their versions, and the truth is the truth, and all of these things. Like, people create their own realities. And there are some things that happen, some mental disorders, let's put it that way, that cause people to create their own alternative reality. And so there were people in my life who were a part of the story that had created their own alternative reality, told people that, and then I got attacked. And that was one of the things I was terrified for, is telling my story and getting attacked. Anyways, I told my story, and the facts are the facts, right? And you can hear all about finding the joy in my trauma. It's episode 11. You can hear about the trauma. You can hear about the experience. Why I'm talking about that, though, is because a couple of years ago, when I first started telling my story, I got a little bit nervous and I was a little bit sheltered in that space. But once I started telling my story and owning my truth, I got to own the story instead of the story owning me. So it was a huge part of the development of recovery for me that I didn't expect. I had been told to do it, and here's the deal. Sometimes we're told to do something over and over and over again, and then we don't do it. And then when we finally do it, and we're like, "Oh, it worked." We're shocked, right? We're always shocked when it actually works, as if the experts aren't the experts on purpose. Anyways, I digress. So telling my story was so very important, but it wasn't the most fundamental. The most fundamental part of the story and the most fundamental part of my healing was the forgiveness aspect. And I'm going to applaud you, first of all, for even listening to this episode, because there's a lot of people who refuse forgiveness. There's a lot of people who refuse to learn what forgiveness is, how to do it. And forgiveness is so funny, because if I could make the episode cover of this the meme of Michael Scott going, "I declare bankruptcy," like, "I declare forgiveness," is what I feel like people do when it comes to forgiveness. And it was a couple of years ago. It was 2022. Y'all have heard me talk about 2022. Maybe I'll do an entire 2022 recap episode of why that was one of the most fundamentally life-changing years for me. I'll add it to the list. But until then, in 2022, actually, in 2021, let's start there. I chose to forgive my dad for the trauma that occurred in my life at his hands. I decided to forgive him. And I do this activity. It's called Act of Forgiveness. You'll have a link in the show notes to take the course if you would like. I realized over time in working with my clients that forgiveness is not just declaring it. You can't just say, "I forgive somebody." You have to actively work on forgiving them. Saying the words forgiveness and declaring it, "I declare bankruptcy, I declare forgiveness," it's not how it works. And I found that a lot of people say that they forgive others and then do nothing with it. Right? They like, "I forgive you," and then allow that person or experience to still dictate their emotions or their feelings or their response to the world. See, having a response and choosing a response and experiencing responses shows a level of healing that's not there. And it also shows a level of forgiveness. And so I created this program called Act of Forgiveness, where you actively forgive the person. It's not just declaring it. There is work that needs to be done in it. And I've done this now with, every client that's worked with me. I've done it with groups. I've done it in teams, but active forgiveness allows you the space to release the emotions and the feelings inside of your body to actually forgive whatever it is that you're holding on to. Now, we know because we hear this everywhere, that forgiveness is for you. It's not for them. And that's true. It is so true that forgiveness is for you and not for the other person. Here's the fucking deal though, people. And that is it. Like, in order to choose that forgiveness, it's really, really, really hard. It is really, really hard to let go of resentment and shame and blame and guilt for things that another person has done to you or a situation that has happened, because we almost start to identify with that story. It becomes part of our story. And it's okay that it's a part of your story, but we identify with it so much that we refuse to let it go. And so when you actively forgive somebody, you are actually removing the identity that is attached to the story, but you get to keep the story. And here's why this is important. People think that forgiveness is a clean slate. It is on an emotional stance, it is on a spiritual stance, but forgiveness does not mean forgetting. I think a lot of people refuse to forgive others because they think they are going to forget and then also be left in this space of lack of safety or lack of security because they've chosen to forgive. And that's also another reason why people refuse to forgive, right? Because they fear, well, what if it happens again? What if this person chooses to hurt me again? What if they choose to come after me again? Like, that was my big fear. If I choose to forgive this person who caused me harm, is it going to happen again? And is it going to happen again by his hands, or is it going to happen again by somebody else's? Is it me letting my guard down? I will let you know forgiveness is a release of the emotional identity that you've put into the story, but it doesn't mean you forget. What that means is that you stop responding to the world in a way that you have been based off of the story that you've held on to. Instead, you can go amongst the world, and then if said thing happens to you again, a person who promised to respect you chooses not to, if a person comes after you, if, like, God forbid something bad happens similar to what happened before. If you go along the world thinking that that's going to happen regularly, you fear it all the time. When it shows back up, the easiest way to talk about this is like the lack of respect, right? If somebody disrespected you and then swore they would never do it again and then did it again, you forgave them the first time, but you didn't forget. And it's the not forgetting that creates a solid boundary in your life. And that boundary then becomes that safety mechanism, not the emotional story or the fear that you have attached to the story of the original act. Now, the forgiveness is clean the slate, but the not forgetting allows you to set a boundary so that you can also protect yourself. And that's where people get lost. When they declare forgiveness, they think it's a forgetting, and then they don't protect themselves moving forward. You have every right as a human being to protect yourself from the things that don't serve you, from the experiences that once hardened you. Like, you have the opportunity to protect yourself from that. That's just your God-given right. That's your human right if you are not of the Christian faith, right? Like, it is your human right to protect yourself in that space. So now that I've said that, it's important to understand, again, that forgiveness is for you, but it's to rewrite the story and free you from the story. It frees you from the identity. It frees you from living in that experience over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And forgiveness, people, I'm going to tell you, we hold forgiveness on this platform almost, that somebody has to do absolutely something heinous, or somebody has to like they use forgiveness with a lot of trauma people, but if you haven't experienced great trauma, maybe you haven't been guided through it. Like, we think that forgiveness has to be held on this pedestal of really big things, when in actuality you can forgive a lot of different things. You can forgive the big, obviously. You should forgive the big. You need to work on forgiving the big. And we all, unfortunately, have things and people that we need to forgive in our lives. We do. But you can also forgive the small. Now, I'm not saying you have to act of forgiveness, small things, but you can forgive the person who cut you off as opposed to screaming at them and letting them ruin your day. You can forgive, the person who treated you badly in line at the grocery store. You can forgive. Like, forgiveness is one of those energies very similar to gratitude that opens up your aura. It opens up your experience. It opens up your spiritual space that allows you to move forward. When you hold on to all of this, it's grungy and it just stays with you. And when you hold on to those negative stories, it just, like, I don't even, just making a lot of noises and hand gestures if you're not watching the video, but it's just crunchy. So in 2022 or 2021, I chose to forgive my dad. I chose to go through my act of forgiveness ceremony. And instead of doing the burning activity that is part of it, I chose to send him my forgiveness letters. I chose to send it to him. And the coolest thing about what happened is, well, let me go back one step. I had been paying for a P.O. box at a USPS, postal service location near my house. I'd been paying for one for over 2 years because I knew that at some point I was going to write my dad, and I didn't want him to have my address if I did. And so I sent this forgiveness letter, obviously used my PO box for the first time, it's the best money I've ever spent. I'm not going to lie to you. Even though it was 2 years worth, it took some time. It took me time to get to the space. And it actually took my friend Michelle yelling at me. Michelle is one of the kindest, most gentle hearted beings on the planet. And in my office in front of Jesus and everybody, she yelled at me for needing to heal from my story, basically, and needing to forgive my dad. And if you ask her to this day, she does not remember that conversation, but I do, because it was like Jesus was speaking through her that I needed to hear it. And it had to come from somebody who, because I think over time, the universe, my guides, everybody was showing me that that was a step I needed to take. And I kept avoiding it. I kept looking away. I kept doing this because it's uncomfortable. It is an uncomfortable activity, I will tell you. But, sometimes the best things come from really uncomfortable things. It's really important for you to remember that. But Michelle yelled at me and said I needed to forgive my dad. And so in 2021, I did. I wrote the letter, I sent it off. And much to my surprise, 3 weeks later, I went to the P.O. box expecting nothing to be there except for the junk mail that always comes in. And there was a letter from my dad. And that started this healing and forgiveness journey that him and I have both been on. It was in 2022. Why 2022 was a big year for me. 2022 was the year that I decided to challenge my own narrative. I decided to dig deeper in who I was. And that was the year that I decided to go see my dad again for the first time in 12 years, in person, in jail, face to face, toe to toe, and experience not only his life, but experience what it's like to actively have a conversation with somebody that it took you so long to heal from, uh, and to forgive, and to be able to have healing conversations. And that's what it's been like with my father and I for the last 2 years, is that every time I've gone to visit, it's been a healing conversation. We talk about sports and we email back and forth, and I get to send him books, and we talk on the phone, and every time I'm with him, we get to have those conversations that I never imagined myself having. And I stand here, or sit here, I'm not standing. I sit here today in front of you in this space of, had I not forgiven him, had I not gone in 2022 to see him for the first time and rekindled that relationship, had I not gone through the act of forgiveness, I wouldn't have learned things about his family that maybe I was called to heal. I wouldn't learn things about my family that maybe I was called to hear. I wouldn't have been able to hear the stories or the way that he talks about who I was as a child and who I was as a young adult, because he left my life when I was 21. I also wouldn't be able to have the opportunity to show him who I grew into. I spent a lot of my life performing, and I had to heal from the performance to show my dad that I was worthy of his love because of how I could show up in the world. And as an adult now, getting to sit and talk with my dad and getting to heal that worthiness wound that I had, I got to become a different person. I got to learn that I was worthy of love no matter how I showed up. I got to heal through that. I also got to allow my father to apologize and also help him heal himself through his own forgiveness, because here's the deal too with forgiveness is that when you forgive, you can heal the other person, but one of the hardest things about forgiveness is forgiving yourself. The act of forgiveness with yourself is one of the hardest things to do. And I got to guide my dad through forgiving himself and being in this space of, like, he did a heinous crime, and being able to give him space to forgive and not forget, but understand and have those conversations and heal and heal and heal and heal. One of the Speaking of healing, one of the most important things for you to think about in your forgiveness journey is that, again, forgiveness is not for you, but it heals you and it can heal the other person. But when you work on you, forgiveness is just one of those layers of working on you. And when you work on you, you heal you. You actually end up healing 7 generations forward and 7 generations back. Oftentimes, when I am guiding through clients through forgiveness activities, they find that their parents start to open up to them more. They start to have conversations that they never thought they would have with siblings, aunts and uncles, family members, because as you heal your generations and you start to heal your family line. If you're experiencing a really hard time, or you feel like you're experiencing things that you've never nobody else in your family has ever experienced, you're a chosen one. We call them generational trauma flippers. They're the ones that come in. I like to think, not flippers, but kind of like Jacques from Finding Nemo. Like, we're cleaning the tank. You're cleaning the family lines, and it's interesting who is chosen. Actually, I like to believe that everybody in your family line is chosen. It's just that not everybody chooses to take the call. And so if you feel like you're struggling, just know that you chose to take the call. And while that's unfortunate, or not unfortunate, uncomfortable, that can be uncomfortable, it is a wonderful thing to do. Forgiveness is one of the hardest in that line. To heal generational trauma, forgiveness is very, very hard. And so in 2022, reconnecting with my dad, I got to forgive him. He got to forgive me. We got to change how our story ended. And so for the last few months, I've gotten to experience a part of life I never thought I would get to experience. And while that is my dad's story, and he's asked me not to share it very publicly, and I won't, I have experienced what life is like taking into account aging parents, is the best way to put it. And so for the last few months, I've gone through this just like crazy emotional roller coaster of, well, if I would have never forgiven him, I wouldn't be here in this place anyways. And I know that's a terrible, terrible thing to think, but it's one of the thoughts, and I'm only human. It's like, oh man, this experience wouldn't be mine if I had chosen not to. And I will tell you that even though that thought has crossed my mind, I chose to, and I'm so very thankful. The good always ends up outweighing the bad if you choose to look for it. If you choose to process that system, that scenario, that situation. And so because I chose to grow in 2022 and I chose to have the hard conversations and do the hard things, I've experienced a hard couple of months that I never thought I'd get to experience. So I'm kind of grateful that I do, that I get to be there and be support and have the hard conversations and have the tears and have the big emotions and get to experience actually what a panic attack feels like, because I don't think that I've ever really truly had one of those. And I had one recently and I'm like, wow, this fucking sucks. But it's good. It sounds terrible, but it's good for me to experience because it's something I never experienced before, but I have talked people through many, many times. All that's to say, in this season of life, I've had to choose to forgive myself instead of choosing to forgive other people as one typically does. Like, it's easier, like I said earlier, to forgive other people than it is to forgive yourself. And I've had to forgive myself for thoughts that I've had or mistakes that I've made or experiences that I've had. Like, it's just been one of those healing seasons where I know God and the universe and guides and everybody are preparing me for the people who are coming to my doorstep. It's I love the work that I get to do because I get to serve the people of the world. And sometimes serving the people of the world requires me to experience it first. And it requires a lot of forgiveness. It does. It requires so much forgiveness. And so I know you're listening to this. If you're here at the end and you're still listening to this, there's somebody in your head that's popping in that you need to forgive. I want you to get the course inside of the comments. I have it at a discounted rate right now. Get the course, do the work, actively forgive, and work on actively forgiving yourself as well. And see what that does to spark just an abundance of change and hope and experiences. Actually, after I get off this recording, I'm going to go do a couple forgiveness activities as well, because there's some people that I need to forgive and some more things on myself I need to forgive as well. So I hope that you have the courage to do the activity. I hope you have the courage to share it with somebody. I hope you have the courage to have the hard conversations and to work on your forgiveness. It is one of the most abundantly prosperous things you can do, along with spreading gratitude. So I hope you have a great day. I hope you can do it with a broken heart. I know you can. I know you can move. I know you can groove. And I know that it is possible. If this podcast helped you, please share it with somebody. Please like, download, become one of our subscribers. That's exactly how we get to move up in the self-help realm and help more people. Say more words exists to give you a story and a platform and a line to be seen, heard, loved, and cared for, and to know that you are not so special that you're the only one that these things happen to. I hope you have the best day, and I'll see you next week.